I'm Lieutenant Colonel Isabella Horner, 39 years old, and I grew up watching F-15s slice across the Nevada sky while my father worked the flight line and my mother ran the base clinic. I earned my wings, my call sign Reaper 4, and command of an F-22 squadron the hard way, through discipline, precision, and a decade of proving I belonged. For years, I gave everything to the mission: loyalty, time, trust, even to leaders who questioned my place in the room. But when a Navy Admiral ordered me out of a joint briefing like I didn't deserve to be there, only to freeze when my call sign flashed on the screen, I made a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been humiliated by someone who didn't know your worth until it was too late? If so, you're not alone. Before I tell you what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from, and if you've ever had to stand your ground after being underestimated, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about respect, boundaries, and quiet revenge. What happened next might surprise you. I grew up watching jets tear through the sky above Nellis Air Force Base, their contrails cutting white lines across the Nevada desert. My father worked the flight line, hands permanently stained with hydraulic fluid and jet fuel. My mother ran the base clinic, stitching up training injuries and reminding pilots that invincibility was a feeling, not a fact. They taught me that precision wasn't optional and that respect was something you built one decision at a time. I joined the Air Force Academy at 22, the first female cadet from my town. The local paper ran a story with a photo of me in dress blues, standing in front of my parents' house. My father cut it out and pinned it to his workbench. My mother framed it and hung it in the clinic waiting room. I carried both of those gestures with me through every morning run, every academic board, every flight simulation that felt designed to break me. Colonel Derek Hale became my mentor during advanced flight training. He was 48 then, a decorated F-15 pilot with a reputation for producing exceptional wingmen. He pulled me aside after my third training sortie and said something I never forgot. "Horner, you fly like you're trying to prove something. Stop. You either can or you can't. The jet doesn't care about your feelings." He was right. I'd been so focused on being the best female pilot that I'd forgotten to just be the best pilot. After that conversation, something shifted. I stopped anticipating judgment and started anticipating threats. My scores improved. My instructors stopped watching me differently. I became just another pilot in the ready room, and that anonymity felt like victory. I earned my call sign during a training intercept that went wrong over the Gulf. My wingman's hydraulics failed at 20,000 feet, and he was losing altitude fast. Tower wanted him to eject over water. I talked him through a controlled descent instead, shadowing his aircraft the entire way down, feeding him airspeed corrections and angle adjustments until he touched down on a remote auxiliary strip with 50 feet of runway to spare. The debrief officer said I'd been calm as death on the radio. Someone muttered "Reaper" and it stuck. The call sign felt appropriate. I didn't showboat. I didn't need the glory. I just brought people home. By the time I made Major, I was leading a 12-pilot F-22 squadron out of Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in Alaska. We ran intercepts along the Aleutian Corridor, shadowing Russian bombers that tested our airspace like clockwork. My squadron trusted me because I never asked them to do anything I wouldn't do first. We trained in weather that grounded commercial flights. We flew night sorties in conditions that made instrument panels feel like suggestions. We became a unit that didn't need to talk much because we'd learned to think in formation. But the Air Force is still a hierarchy, and hierarchies have patterns. I watched male pilots with half my flight hours get promoted ahead of me. I sat in briefings where my recommendations were dismissed until a man repeated them verbatim 5 minutes later. I learned to document everything, to speak in declarative sentences, to never let frustration show on my face. Colonel Hale called it playing the long game. I called it exhausting. When the Sky Shield initiative launched, it was supposed to be a triumph of joint operations. The Air Force and Navy would integrate command structures, share intelligence, and run coordinated missions across air and sea domains. It sounded good in the press releases. In practice, it meant a lot of officers from different branches trying to prove their service was superior while pretending to collaborate. I was assigned as the Air Force liaison for the Western Tactical Group, which meant I spent half my time in briefings and the other half translating Air Force doctrine into language Navy officers would accept. It was tedious work, but I believed in the mission. If we could actually integrate our capabilities, we'd be unstoppable. That's when Admiral James Thorne arrived. He was 56, a career Navy officer who'd come up through surface warfare before transitioning to strategic operations. He had the kind of resume that looked impressive on paper: multiple deployments, commendations from 3 different administrations, a reputation for decisive leadership. In person, he was polished and sharp, the kind of officer who dominated rooms without raising his voice. He also had a habit of looking past me. It started small. I'd brief a tactical assessment, and he'd nod along, then turn to my male counterpart and say, "Captain Reeves, what do you think?" As if I'd just been warming up the room. I'd submit reports that went into meetings with my name on them and came out with someone else's signature. When I called it out, I was told I was being overly sensitive or that this is how joint operations work. Commander Rick Lawson noticed it too. He was a Navy liaison I'd worked with on a prior exercise, a sharp tactical mind with an easy sense of humor. We'd built a solid working relationship, the kind where you could disagree in a meeting and grab coffee afterward without tension. He was 38, ambitious, but fair. Or so I thought. One afternoon, after a particularly frustrating briefing where Admiral Thorne had reassigned my squadron's air coverage plan to a Navy asset without consultation, Lawson caught up with me in the corridor. "That was out of line," he said quietly. "It was strategic," I replied. "He's establishing dominance. If I push back too hard, I'm insubordinate. If I don't push back, I'm irrelevant." Lawson hesitated, then said, "He's not going to change, Isabella. You know that, right?" "I'm not asking him to change. I'm asking him to follow protocol." He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. Not pity. Calculation. He was deciding whether aligning with me or with Thorne would serve his career better. "I'll talk to him," Lawson said. He never did. Over the next few weeks, Lawson started showing up to Thorne's office more often. He stopped copying me on prep emails. In meetings, he'd echo Thorne's positions even when they contradicted things we'd agreed on privately. I watched him choose his path, and I didn't blame him. Ambition makes people flexible. But it still felt like betrayal. One evening, Colonel Hale stopped by my office. He'd been observing the SkyShield integration from a distance, technically retired, but still consulted on joint ops. He sat down across from me and set a cup of coffee on my desk. "They're setting you up to be the example, not the exception," he said. "I know. Do you?" He leaned forward. "Because from where I'm sitting, you're still trying to win their respect. You can't win a game where the rules change every time you're about to score. So what do? You keep flying. You keep leading. And you stop expecting fairness from people who benefit from the system being unfair." He left, and I sat there staring at my flight logs, at years of missions and citations and performance reviews that all said the same thing: exceptional officer, strong leader, recommend for advancement. And yet here I was, watching men with fewer qualifications make decisions about my command. The air was shifting. I could feel it. Center in San Diego. My team had spent 3 weeks preparing the tactical package, air coverage maps, intercept protocols, logistical coordination for a simulated carrier defense exercise. The data was solid. The plan was tight. I'd briefed it twice to my own command and gotten unanimous approval. I flew down the night before, reviewed my notes in the hotel room, and showed up 30 minutes early in dress blues. Nameplate aligned, ribbons positioned exactly to regulation, shoes polished to a mirror finish. I'd learned that in these environments, appearance was scrutinized before competence. The conference room was filling up when I arrived. Navy officers clustered near the front, Air Force personnel toward the sides, a few Marine liaisons in the back. The room had that pre-briefing energy: coffee cups, low conversation, people reviewing slides on tablets. I took a seat near the center, close enough to be visible but not so forward that it felt aggressive. Admiral Thorne entered at 12:55, trailed by his staff. He had that command presence that made people straighten in their chairs. He didn't acknowledge me, which wasn't unusual. He rarely did. The briefing started on time. A Navy captain presented the operational overview, then handed off to me for the air component. I stood, moved to the podium, and pulled up the first slide. Good afternoon. I'm Major Isabella Horner, F-22 Squadron Commander for the Western Tactical Group. Our team has developed an integrated air defense plan that coordinates Air Force assets with carrier-based aviation to provide layered coverage across the exercise zone. I walked through the first 3 slides: threat assessment, asset allocation, communication protocols. The room was quiet, attentive. I was hitting my marks. Then Admiral Thorne interrupted. Major, I'm not sure we need this level of detail. We're familiar with air coverage basics. I paused. Sir, this is the framework the exercise is built on. The Joint Command requested a comprehensive briefing. I understand that. His tone was patient, like he was explaining something to a slow student. But we've got a lot to cover today, and frankly, this feels redundant. I felt the room's attention shift. A few officers glanced at each other. I kept my voice level. Respectfully, Admiral, the air component is critical to the exercise's success. Without clear coordination, we risk blue-on-blue incidents and coverage gaps. He smiled. Not warmly. Major Horner, I appreciate your enthusiasm. But let's keep this moving. I nodded and continued, adjusting my pace. I made it through 2 more slides before he interrupted again. Actually, let's pause here. He stood, moving toward the front of the room. Captain Reeves, you've been working on similar plans. Why don't you walk us through the Navy's perspective? Reeves looked uncomfortable but stood. He pulled up his own slides, which were essentially a reformatted version of the plan I'd submitted 2 weeks earlier. Same data, same conclusions, different service logo. I sat down. Lawson was 3 seats away, staring at his tablet. He didn't look up. The briefing continued without me. When it ended, I gathered my materials and headed for the door. I was almost to the corridor when Admiral Thorne's voice carried across the room. Major Horner, a word. I turned. He was standing near the podium, arms crossed, surrounded by his staff. Yes, sir. In the future, when I ask you to wrap up, I expect you to wrap up. We're running tight schedules here, and I don't have time for drawn-out presentations. Understood, sir. Good. He glanced at the officers around him, then back at me. And next time, maybe skip the full dress uniform. We're running a briefing, not a fashion show. The room went quiet. A few officers laughed, nervous and quick. I felt my face flush, but I kept my expression neutral. Noted, sir. I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard someone say, "Guess she got the message." More laughter. I was 3 steps from the exit when the digital board behind the podium synced to the secure network. It was automatic, triggered by the end of the briefing module. The screen flashed white, then displayed the access roster for classified operations tied to the exercise. Top of the list, top clearance, Reaper 4, F-22 Command. The laughter stopped. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what they were seeing. Reaper 4 wasn't just a call sign. It was tied to a classified sortie 3 years earlier, a mission that had extracted a trapped Navy reconnaissance team during a failed operation in the Helmand province. The team had been pinned down by enemy fire, their extraction helo shot down, no air support within range. Except there was. My squadron had been running a training exercise 200 miles away. We diverted, burned through our fuel reserves, and provided close air support until a Marine unit could move in. We didn't lose a single person. The mission commander for that operation had been Admiral James Thorne. I heard a chair scrape behind me. Someone whispered, "That's her." I reached the door, turned back, and offered a crisp salute. "Gentlemen." Then I walked out. The corridor was empty and bright, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I made it to the stairwell before my hands started shaking. Not from fear. From the effort of holding everything in. I sat on the steps for 5 minutes, breathing slowly, waiting for the adrenaline to fade. Then I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app. I documented everything: time, location, exact words, witnesses present. Not because I planned to file a complaint. Because I'd learned that in the military, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. My phone buzzed. A text from Captain Dana Wells, my second-in-command back in Alaska. Heard the briefing got interesting. You good? News traveled fast. I typed back, I'm fine. Heading back tomorrow. Another buzz. This time from Lawson, can we talk? I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. I flew back to Alaska the next morning on a cold, gray dawn. The transport was half empty, just a handful of personnel rotating between assignments. I sat in the back, staring out the window as the California coast disappeared below. The story reached Alaska before I did. I landed at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson at 1900 hours, and by the time I walked into the squadron office, 3 people stopped mid-conversation to look at me. Captain Wells was waiting at my desk, arms crossed, trying not to smile. So, she said. Fashion show, huh? Don't. Too late. It's already a thing. Someone recorded the screen sync on their phone. It's making the rounds. I dropped my bag and sat down. How bad? Depends on your perspective. For you? Validation. For Admiral Thorne? Career damage. I didn't do anything. Exactly. That's what makes it perfect. She leaned against the desk. You just existed, and the system corrected itself. I pulled up my email. 200 unread messages. Most were routine, but a few had subject lines like San Diego Incident, and Sky Shield Command Inquiry. I opened the inquiry email first. It was from a Joint Chiefs liaison, politely requesting a detailed account of the briefing, specifically regarding procedural irregularities in clearance protocol. Translation: someone was covering their exposure, and they needed my version on record. I spent the next hour writing it out. Facts only. No emotion. No editorial commentary. Just a timeline. I was removed from an active briefing despite holding top clearance for the operation being discussed. The removal was based on non-operational grounds. The clearance confirmation was displayed automatically by the system, which corrected the procedural error. I sent it, then closed my laptop. Wells was still there. You filing anything else? No. Why not? Because I don't need to. He already lost. She studied me for a moment. You know he's going to try to spin this, right? Make it about you being difficult, not him being let him. I stood and grabbed my jacket. I'm not interested in his narrative. I've got a squadron to run. That night, I went home to the small base apartment I'd lived in for 2 years. 1 bedroom, a kitchenette, a window that looked out over the flight line. I could hear the low rumble of engines being tested, the clang of maintenance crews working the night shift. It was the same soundtrack I'd grown up with, the same rhythm my father had worked to for 30 years. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the planes. My phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Colonel Hale. You've been busy, he said when I answered. Not intentionally. The best revenge never is. He paused. How are you holding up? I'm fine. Isabella. I exhaled. I'm tired, Derek. I'm tired of proving myself to people who've already decided I don't belong. I'm tired of being the example. I'm tired of staying calm when I should be angry. So be angry. I can't afford to be angry. Angry women get labeled emotional. Emotional women get dismissed. Then be cold. Be precise. Be exactly what they can't argue with. His voice softened. You've spent your whole career playing by their rules. Maybe it's time to play by yours. What does that look like? It looks like you stop asking for permission to be excellent. We talked for another 20 minutes about nothing and everything. When we hung up, I felt steadier. Not fixed, but steadier. Over the next week, the fallout spread. Admiral Thorne received a formal inquiry from the Joint Chiefs regarding the briefing incident. The inquiry wasn't public, but rumors were. Officers I barely knew started reaching out, some offering support, others fishing for details they could use as gossip. I ignored most of it. I had training cycles to run, flight evaluations to complete, maintenance schedules to approve. My squadron didn't care about Navy politics. They cared about whether their commander could lead them through a mission and bring them home. Major Sophia Tran, my intel officer, stopped by my office one afternoon with a cup of coffee and a knowing look. You're handling this well, she said. I'm handling it the only way I know how. By pretending it didn't happen? By not letting it define what happens next. She nodded. For what it's worth, half the base thinks you're a legend now. The other half thinks you're a liability. But everybody's talking about you. I don't want them talking about me. I want them doing their jobs. Too late. You're a story now. Might as well decide what kind. She left, and I sat there staring at the flight schedule on my wall. She was right. I'd become a narrative, whether I wanted to be or not. The question was whether I'd let other people write it or take control of it myself. 2 weeks after San Diego, I received a call from the Air Force Personnel Center. They were offering me a transfer, command of the Falcon Wing, an elite F-22 training detachment based in Nevada. It was a promotion in everything but name, a chance to shape the next generation of fighter pilots. It was also a way to quietly remove me from the SkyShield disaster. I asked for 72 hours to consider it. I spent those 3 days flying, running training sorties over the Arctic, pushing my squadron through low-altitude intercepts and high-speed maneuvers that required absolute trust. We flew in weather that would have grounded civilian aircraft, navigating by instruments and instinct. On the 3rd day, I took a solo sortie at dusk. I climbed to 40,000 feet and leveled off, watching the sun sink below the horizon, turning the ice fields below into a sheet of gold and shadow. Up there, the world felt small. Ego felt smaller. I radioed back to base. Reaper 4 returning to base. Permission to land. Roger, Reaper 4. You're cleared. Welcome home. I descended through the clouds, lined up with the runway, and brought the jet down smooth. As the wheels touched asphalt, I made my decision. I accepted the transfer. Not because I was running. Because I was done waiting for a system to validate me. I'd spent years proving I belonged. Now I was going to lead. When I told Colonel Hale, he laughed. About time. You think I'm making the right call? I think you're making your call. That's all that matters. I filed the paperwork that afternoon. Within a week, my transfer was approved. Within 2 weeks, I was packing up my office in Alaska, saying goodbye to a squadron that had become family, and preparing to take command of a unit I'd only read about. Before I left, Captain Wells pulled me aside. You know they're going to test you, right? The new pilots. They're going to want to see if you're as good as your reputation. Let them test me. And if they don't respect you, then I'll earn it. Same way I always have. She smiled. Good answer. I left Alaska on a clear morning, the kind where you could see the mountains stretching forever. As the transport lifted off, I looked back one last time at the base, at the flight line, at the life I was leaving behind. Forward. Always forward. The Falcon Wing was based at Nellis Air Force Base, which meant I was coming home. Not to the house I grew up in, but to the flight line where I'd first learned what discipline looked like. My father had retired 5 years earlier, but his legacy was still there in the maintenance crews who remembered him, who'd heard I was taking command and made a point to introduce themselves. Your old man taught me everything I know about hydraulics, one crew chief said. Good to have a Horner back on the line. The Falcon Wing wasn't a standard squadron. It was a training detachment for pilots transitioning into F-22s, which meant I'd be working with officers who were already experienced, but needed to adapt to the most advanced fighter in the Air Force arsenal. They were good pilots. My job was to make them exceptional. I met my new command team on a Tuesday morning. 12 pilots, ranging from captains to majors, all handpicked for their skills and potential. They assembled in the briefing room at 0800 hours, standing at attention as I walked in. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. Good morning. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Isabella Horner. My call sign is Reaper 4. Some of you have heard of me. Some of you haven't. Either way, what you've heard doesn't matter. What matters is what happens in this room and in the air over the next 6 months. I paused, making eye contact with each pilot. This detachment has a reputation for producing the best F-22 pilots in the Air Force. We're going to maintain that standard. You're here because someone believed you could handle this aircraft. I'm here to make sure they were right. We'll train hard, we'll train smart, and we'll train safely. Questions? A captain in the second row raised his hand. Ma'am, is it true you flew the Helmand extraction? Yes, that was 3 years ago. Ancient history. Next question. Silence. They were sizing me up, trying to figure out if I was as capable as the story suggested or just someone who'd gotten lucky. I'd seen that look before. All right then. We start flight evaluations tomorrow at 0600. Dismissed. They filed out and I watched them go. A few lingered in the corridor, talking in low voices. I heard one say, "She's intense." Another replied, "Let's see if she can fly." I could fly. Over the next 2 weeks, I ran each pilot through evaluation sorties, assessing their strengths and identifying their gaps. I flew with them, not just observed them. I wanted to see how they handled pressure, how they adapted to unexpected scenarios, how they communicated under stress. Some were exceptional. Others had bad habits that would get them killed in combat. I documented everything, then called each pilot in for individual debriefs. "Captain Mendoza, you're aggressive on the stick. That works in a simulator. In a real jet, you'll overstress the airframe. Major Carver, your situational awareness is strong, but you're hesitant on radio calls. Hesitation gets people killed. Decide faster. Lieutenant Colonel Briggs, you fly like you're competing against your wingmen instead of supporting them. This isn't about being the best. It's about making sure everyone comes home." They listened. Some bristled. But they listened. By the end of the first month, the squadron was starting to cohere. The pilots who'd been skeptical were coming around, not because I'd won them over with charm, but because the results were undeniable. Flight scores improved. Mistakes decreased. The team was tightening. Then I got a message from the Pentagon. Admiral Thorne's promotion to Vice Admiral had been delayed indefinitely. The official reason was administrative review. The unofficial reason was that his conduct during the San Diego briefing had triggered a broader look at his leadership style, and what they found wasn't flattering. Multiple complaints from junior officers, instances of favoritism, a pattern of dismissing personnel based on factors unrelated to performance. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. Commander Rick Lawson was reassigned to staff duty at a desk job in Norfolk. No formal reprimand, just a quiet reassignment that effectively ended his upward trajectory. He called me once, left a voicemail I never returned. The system had corrected itself, but not because of justice. Because the optics were bad. Because people who had the power to ignore the problem finally couldn't anymore. I was in my office late one evening, reviewing training schedules, when Colonel Hale stopped by. He was in civilian clothes, visiting Nellis for a contractor consultation. "You're working late," he said. "Always am." He sat down across from my desk. "You heard about Thorne?" I heard. And nothing. It doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change the fact that it took a public incident for anyone to care. You're right. It doesn't. He leaned back. But it does mean the next woman who walks into a briefing room might have an easier time. That's not nothing. I didn't do this for the next woman. I did it because I had to. I know. That's what makes it matter. We sat in silence for a moment. Then he said, "You know what altitude does, Isabella? It gives you perspective. From up there, all the noise gets quiet. All the politics, the egos, the games, they get small. You see the mission. You see what actually matters." Is that your way of telling me to let it go? No. It's my way of telling you that you're already past it. You've moved on. The question is whether you're going to let them keep pulling you back. He was right. I'd been carrying the San Diego incident like a weight, replaying it, analyzing it, trying to make sense of people who'd never make sense. I needed to put it down. After Hale left, I walked out to the flight line. It was nearly midnight, but the base never fully slept. Maintenance crews worked under floodlights, and the smell of jet fuel hung in the cool desert air. I stood there watching them work, thinking about my father, about all the years he'd spent keeping jets airborne. He'd never cared about rank or recognition. He cared about the work. About doing it right. I pulled out my phone and sent a message to Captain Wells back in Alaska. "Thanks for everything. You'll make a hell of a commander someday." She replied within minutes. "Learned from the best. Give 'em hell, Reaper." I took a night flight the following week, a solo sortie over the desert. I climbed to 40,000 feet, where the stars were sharp and infinite, and let the F-22 do what it was built to do. The jet responded to the smallest inputs, powerful and precise, a machine that demanded respect and gave it back. I thought about how far I'd come. From a kid watching jets overhead to the officer flying them. From someone who had to fight for every ounce of credibility to someone who didn't need anyone's permission to lead. The radio crackled. Reaper 4, this is Nellis Tower. Requesting status. Nellis Tower, Reaper 4. All systems green. Returning to base. Copy that, Reaper. Good to have you home. I smiled. Good to be home. I descended through the night sky, the lights of Las Vegas glowing in the distance, the desert stretching dark and vast below. As I lined up for landing, I realized something. I didn't need Thorne's apology. I didn't need Lawson's friendship. I didn't need validation from people who'd proven they couldn't see past their own limitations. I had the jet. I had my squadron. I had the mission. That was enough. 6 months into my command of the Falcon Wing, I received a formal request for a meeting. The sender was Admiral James Thorne. The email was brief and professional. He would be in Nevada for a joint operations review and requested a private conversation. No staff, no officials, just the two of us. He included his personal cell number and asked me to call if I was willing. I stared at the email for 10 minutes before forwarding it to Colonel Hale without comment. He called me within an hour. Are you going to meet with him? I don't know. What do you want to happen? I want him to leave me alone. I want to never think about San Diego again. I want to focus on my squadron and forget he exists. Then don't meet with him. But you're going to anyway. Because you need to know what he wants. And because you're curious whether he's capable of actually taking responsibility. He was right. I was curious. I called Thorne that evening. The conversation lasted 90 seconds. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop off base, neutral territory, at 1600 hours the following Tuesday. I told no one except Hale and Captain Wells. Wells asked if I wanted her to come as a witness. I declined. Whatever this was, I needed to handle it alone. Tuesday arrived cold and clear. I drove to the coffee shop in civilian clothes, jeans and a jacket, trying to look like anyone else grabbing an afternoon caffeine fix. Thorne was already there, sitting at a corner table, also in civilian clothes. He looked older than I remembered. Tired. He stood when I approached. Major Horner. Thank you for coming. Lieutenant Colonel, I corrected. Right. Apologies. He gestured to the chair across from him. Please. I sat. A waitress came by, and I ordered black coffee. Thorne had tea in front of him, barely touched. We sat in silence for a moment. Then he spoke. I'm not good at this, he said. Apologies, I mean. I've spent my career giving orders, not explaining myself. But I owe you one. Go ahead. He took a breath. What I said in San Diego was inappropriate, unprofessional, and wrong. I dismissed you based on factors that had nothing to do with your capability or your role in that briefing. I embarrassed you in front of your peers, and I did it because I could. Because no one had ever told me I couldn't. I said nothing. I wanted to hear all of it. When that screen flashed your call sign, I remembered you. I remembered the Hellman extraction. I remembered sitting in an operations center, listening to reports that my reconnaissance team was pinned down with no air support, thinking I'd just ordered 6 people to their deaths. And then I heard your voice on the radio. Calm. Steady. You didn't hesitate. You just acted. He looked down at his tea. You saved my people. And 3 years later, I humiliated you because I didn't recognize your name. Or maybe I did, and I just didn't want to acknowledge that the pilot I owed my career to was a woman I'd been dismissing in meetings for weeks. The coffee shop hummed around us. Quiet conversations, the hiss of an espresso machine, normal people having normal days. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Thorne continued. I don't deserve it. I'm just asking that you know I understand what I did. And that I'm ashamed of it. I took a sip of coffee, letting him sit with the silence. Admiral, I appreciate you saying that. I do. But you're wrong about one thing. What's that? You don't owe me respect because of what I did in Hellman. You owe it because of what I am. A commissioned officer. A squadron commander. A pilot with 15 years of service and a record that speaks for itself. The fact that I had to save your people for you to see me as competent is exactly the problem. He nodded slowly. You're right. I know I'm right. And here's what bothers me most. You're apologizing now because you got caught. Because the optics were bad and it damaged your career. But how many other women did you dismiss before me? How many junior officers did you humiliate when there wasn't a screen to prove their worth? How many people didn't get the chance to have this conversation? His face tightened, but he didn't look away. More than I can count. Then this apology isn't for me. It's for you. It's so you can feel better about what you did and move on. But I don't have that luxury. I'm still the woman who has to prove herself every time I walk into a room. I'm still the officer whose authority gets questioned by people half as qualified. Your apology doesn't change that. No, he said quietly. It doesn't. We sat there for another minute. Then I stood. I accept your apology, Admiral. Not because it fixes anything, but because I don't want to carry anger toward you anymore. It's not worth the energy. But we're not even. We never will be. He stood as well, extending his hand. Fair enough. I shook it. Once. Then I left. I sat in my car for a few minutes before driving back to base, letting the conversation settle. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel healed. I felt like I'd closed a door I'd been staring at for too long. Commander Lawson tried to reach out 2 weeks later. He sent an email asking if we could talk, saying he wanted to explain his actions in San Diego. I read it once, then archived it without responding. There was nothing he could say that would matter. He'd made his choice when it counted. I'd made mine. We were both living with the consequences. Captain Wells called that night. You doing okay? Yeah, I'm good. Hale told me you met with Thorne. Of course he did. She laughed. How'd it go? He apologized. I listened. We're done. That's it. That's it. No dramatic confrontation. No tearful reconciliation. Just two people acknowledging what happened and moving on. Sounds anticlimactic. It was. And that's fine. I don't need drama. I need closure. Did you get it? I thought about that. I think so. Or at least I got as close as I'm going to. We talked for a while longer, catching up on squadron gossip and training schedules. When we hung up, I felt lighter. Not because Thorne had apologized, but because I'd realized something important. His apology wasn't what I needed. What I needed was to trust myself again. To know that my judgment was sound, that my leadership was solid, that I didn't need external validation to know my worth. I had that now. The next morning, I ran my squadron through a complex training scenario, multi-aircraft intercept with simulated surface-to-air threats and communication jamming. It was designed to be chaotic, to force split-second decisions under pressure. My pilots executed flawlessly. After the debrief, Captain Mendoza approached me. Ma'am, that was the best training sortie I've flown in 10 years. Why? Because you trusted us. You gave us the parameters and let us figure it out. You didn't micromanage. You just led. I nodded. That's the job. He smiled. Well, you're damn good at it. As he walked away, I realized that this, right here, was what mattered. Not apologies from people who'd wronged me. Not vindication from a system that had failed me. Just the work. The mission. The people who trusted me to bring them home. I'd rebuilt trust. Not with Thorne or Lawson. With myself. 2 years passed. The Falcon Wing became one of the highest-performing training detachments in the Air Force. Our pilots went on to lead squadrons across 3 continents. 2 received distinguished flying crosses. 1 became an instructor at the weapons school. The work spoke for itself. I was promoted to Colonel 06 at 41. The ceremony was small, just my squadron and a handful of senior officers. My parents flew in from Nevada, my father still moving with the careful precision of someone who'd spent decades working around heavy machinery. My mother cried during the oath, which she tried to hide but couldn't. Colonel Hale pinned on my eagles. Told you the long game was worth it, he said quietly. You were right. I usually am. After the ceremony, my squadron threw together an impromptu celebration at the officers' club. Someone ordered too much food. Someone else smuggled in a bottle of decent whiskey. We stood around swapping stories, the kind of easy camaraderie that only comes from shared hardship and mutual respect. Captain Mendoza, now Major Mendoza, raised a glass. To the Colonel. The best pilot I've ever flown with, and the only commander who's ever actually scared me into being better. The room laughed. I raised my glass back. To the Falcon Wing. You made it easy. Later that night, after everyone had left, I walked out to the flight line alone. The base was quiet, just the distant hum of generators and the occasional bark of orders from a night maintenance crew. I stood there looking at the rows of F-22s, their silhouettes sharp against the Nevada sky. My phone buzzed. A message from Captain Wells. Congratulations, Colonel. Proud doesn't cover it. I typed back, how's command treating you? Exhausting. Rewarding. Exactly like you said it would be. Good. That means you're doing it right. She'd taken over my old squadron in Alaska 6 months earlier. From everything I'd heard, she was exceptional. Better than I'd been at her age. That felt like legacy. I got reassigned 3 months later. Not a lateral move. A significant one. I was given command of a composite air wing, a mix of F-22s, F-35s, and support aircraft responsible for air superiority operations across the Pacific Theater. It was a job typically reserved for officers with 25 years of service. I had 17. The assignment came with a briefing at the Pentagon and a classified operational overview that I couldn't discuss even with my family. What I could say was this: I was responsible for 1,200 personnel, 48 aircraft, and strategic operations that directly impacted national security. It was the job I'd been training for my entire career. The job I'd been told I wasn't ready for 100 times by people who didn't have half my flight hours. I reported to my new command on a Monday morning. The operations center was massive, filled with screens displaying real-time data from across the Pacific. Officers moved with purpose, headsets on, tracking flights and coordinating logistics. I walked in and the room came to attention. At ease. I moved to the central console. I'm Colonel Isabella Horner. I'll be your new wing commander. Some of you know my reputation. Some of you don't. What you need to know is this: we run a tight operation. We train hard, we communicate clearly, and we support each other. I don't care about politics. I don't care about service rivalry. I care about mission success and bringing everyone home. Questions? A young lieutenant raised his hand. Ma'am, is it true you're Reaper 4? Yes. The Reaper 4? From the Helmand extraction. That was a long time ago, Lieutenant. Still, that's legend status, ma'am. I looked at him. Legends are just people who did their jobs under pressure. That's what we do here every day. Let's get to work. The operations tempo was relentless. We ran exercises, coordinated with allied forces, tracked threats, and maintained readiness for scenarios that ranged from routine to catastrophic. I worked 16-hour days, reviewing intelligence reports, approving flight plans, conducting readiness briefings. But I loved it, because this was what I'd been built for. Not the politics or the ceremonies. The mission. One evening, Major Sophia Tran, now serving as my executive officer, stopped by my office with coffee and a knowing smile. You never stop, do you? Neither do you. Fair point. She sat down. You know what people call you? I'm afraid to ask. The calm before the storm. They say you're quiet until something goes wrong, and then you're everywhere at once, fixing it before anyone realizes there was a problem. That's just command. No, that's you. Most commanders react. You anticipate. I shrugged. I've had good teachers. She left, and I went back to work. But her words stuck with me. I thought about all the people who'd shaped my career. My father, who taught me precision. My mother, who taught me resilience. Colonel Hale, who taught me patience. My squadron, who taught me trust. And I thought about the people who'd tried to stop me. Admiral Thorne. Commander Lawson. The countless officers who dismissed me, doubted me, or tried to sideline me. They'd all been part of the story. But they hadn't defined it. I'd defined it. By showing up. By doing the work. By refusing to let their limitations become mine. Late that night, I received a message through official channels. It was from a women's leadership organization asking if I'd speak at their annual conference. They wanted me to share my story, to inspire the next generation of female officers. I declined politely. Not because I didn't believe in the mission, but because I didn't want to be defined by my gender. I wanted to be defined by my competence. Still, I sent them a note. The best way to inspire the next generation is to lead well. Show them what's possible by doing it, not talking about it. A month later, I was sitting in a pre-flight briefing, reviewing a classified sortie with my senior pilots. The mission was complex, a long-range intercept requiring mid-air refueling, precise timing, and flawless coordination. As we finalized the flight plan, one of the pilots, a lieutenant colonel with 15 years of experience, looked at me and said, "Ma'am, I just want to say, it's an honor flying under your command." I nodded. The honor's mine. Let's make it count. We launched at 0400 hours, 6 F-22s climbing into the pre-dawn darkness. I was flying lead, my call sign lighting up the HUD, Reaper 4. The mission went flawlessly. We intercepted the target, gathered the intelligence we needed, and returned without incident. As we descended toward base, the sun was just breaking over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. Tower came over the radio. "Reaper 4, you're cleared for landing." "Welcome home, Colonel." I smiled. Good to be home. As my wheels touched the runway, I thought about respect. About how it's not granted by rank or demanded by authority. It's earned in moments like this, in the silence after the laughter, in the work when no one's watching, in the choices you make when no one would blame you for walking away. Justice hadn't come through revenge. It had come through endurance. Through showing up every day and proving that I belonged, not to anyone else, but to myself. I taxied to the hangar, shut down the engines, and climbed out of the cockpit. My crew chief was waiting, grinning. "Smooth flight, Colonel?" "Always is." As I walked toward the operations center, the sun fully rose behind me, and I realized something. I'd made it. Not because the system had changed. Not because people like Thorne had learned their lesson. But because I'd never stopped flying. 1 year later, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror at 0500 hours, adjusting my dress blues for what felt like the 100th time. The stars on my shoulders were new, Brigadier General, 07, and they still felt foreign. Heavy in a way that had nothing to do with their physical weight. My promotion ceremony was scheduled for 1000 hours at the Pentagon. My parents were flying in. Colonel Hale was coming. Captain Wells, now Major Wells, had requested leave specifically to attend. Even Major Tran had coordinated her schedule to be there. The Secretary of the Air Force would officiate. It was going to be formal, official, and exactly the kind of attention I'd spent my career avoiding. I'd tried to keep it small. The Air Force had other ideas. First female fighter pilot to make general officer, the public affairs officer had said when she called to discuss media coverage. "This is historic, ma'am. We need to recognize that." "I'd rather you didn't." "With respect, Colonel, that's not your call anymore." She was right. At this level, I wasn't just an officer. I was a symbol, whether I wanted to be or not. Every decision I made, every word I spoke, every appearance I attended would be scrutinized not just for its operational merit, but for what it represented. The weight of those stars suddenly made sense. I finished adjusting my uniform, grabbed my keys, and headed out. The drive to the Pentagon took 40 minutes in early morning traffic. I spent most of it listening to a news podcast discussing tensions in the South China Sea, the same tensions that had dominated my operational focus for the past year. The world kept turning. Threats kept evolving. My job kept expanding. I arrived at the Pentagon at 0700 hours and made my way through security to the office I'd been assigned. It was larger than any workspace I'd ever had, with windows overlooking the river and enough room for a conference table. My name was already on the door, Jen Isabella Horner, Deputy Director of Operations. The title felt surreal. Major Tran was waiting inside with coffee and a tablet full of briefings I needed to review before the ceremony. "Morning, General," she said, emphasizing the rank with a slight smile. "Don't start. Too late. It's official in 3 hours." "I'm practicing." She handed me the coffee. "How are you feeling?" Like I'm about to walk into a room full of people who expect me to have answers I don't have. That's called leadership. You've been doing it for years. This is different. It is. But you're ready. I wasn't sure I believed her, but I appreciated the confidence. The morning passed in a blur of meetings and last-minute coordination. At 0930 hours, I was escorted to a preparation room where a protocol officer ran through the ceremony sequence. Stand here. Walk there. Salute. Speak for no more than 3 minutes. Smile for photos. Standard military theater. My parents arrived at 0945. My father looked uncomfortable in his suit, but proud. My mother was crying before she even saw me, which made me laugh despite my nerves. You look beautiful, she said, hugging me tightly. I look like a recruiting poster. Same thing. Colonel Hale arrived moments later, now retired, but still carrying himself like he owned every room he entered. He shook my hand, then pulled me into a brief hug. Your father would have loved this, he said quietly, referring to the man who'd mentored both of us in different ways. He's here, I replied, glancing at my actual father. Just without the flight suit. Hale smiled. I meant your Air Force father. But yes, both of them would be proud. At 0955, we were called to the ceremony hall. It was packed, more people than I'd expected. Senior officers lined the front rows. My squadron commanders from the past decade filled the middle sections. Junior officers and enlisted personnel stood along the walls. The Secretary of the Air Force waited at the podium, flanked by the Chief of Staff and my outgoing predecessor. I walked down the center aisle, acutely aware of every eye tracking my movement. When I reached the front, I came to attention and saluted. The Secretary returned the salute and began speaking. His remarks covered my career highlights: the academy, flight school, squadron command, the Hellman extraction, which I'd hoped wouldn't be mentioned but knew would be, my work with the Falcon Wing, and my recent command of the Pacific Composite Air Wing. He spoke about leadership, resilience, and breaking barriers. Then he paused and looked directly at me. General Horner, you're standing here today not because of your gender, but in spite of the obstacles your gender created. You earned this rank the same way every officer in this room earned theirs, through competence, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to the mission. But you also earned it while carrying a burden that most of us will never fully understand. You had to be twice as good to be seen as half as qualified. You had to prove yourself again and again to people who'd already decided you didn't belong. And you did it with grace, professionalism, and a quiet strength that has inspired everyone who's ever served under your command. The room was silent. Your promotion today is not just a recognition of your achievements. It's a statement about the Air Force we're becoming. One where talent matters more than tradition. Where competence outweighs comfort. Where the best leaders rise, regardless of who they are or where they came from. He stepped forward and removed my Colonel Eagles. My mother and Colonel Hale stepped up to pin on the new stars. My mother's hands shook slightly. Hale's were steady as steel. When they finished, the secretary asked me to speak. I'd prepared remarks. 3 minutes of carefully crafted sentences, thanking the right people and acknowledging the right milestones. But standing there, looking at the faces in front of me, officers I'd flown with, commanded, learned from, I set aside my notes. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, I began. And thank you to everyone here today. I'm honored by this promotion, but I'm more honored by the people I've served alongside. Every pilot who trusted me as their wingman. Every commander who took a chance on me. Every enlisted airman who kept my aircraft flying and my mission possible. This rank isn't mine. It belongs to all of you. I paused, collecting my thoughts. Someone once told me that respect isn't granted by rank, it's earned in the silence after the laughter. I've thought about that a lot over the years. About the moments when people doubted me. When they dismissed me. When they questioned whether I belonged. Those moments hurt. But they also taught me something important. The only opinion that matters is the one you have of yourself. If you know your worth, if you trust your competence, if you believe in your mission, then external validation becomes noise. Useful noise sometimes, but noise nonetheless. I looked at my parents, then at Hale. I learned precision from my father. Resilience from my mother. patience from Colonel Hale, and courage from every pilot who ever climbed into a cockpit knowing the risks, but trusting the mission. Those lessons shaped me. They made me the officer I am today, and they'll guide me in this new role. I straightened my shoulders. As Deputy Director of Operations, I'll continue doing what I've always done, leading from the front, supporting from behind, and making sure everyone comes home. That's the job. That's always been the job. The stars don't change that. They just make the responsibility heavier. I saluted the secretary. Thank you for this honor. I won't waste it. The room erupted in applause. It lasted longer than I expected, long enough that I felt my composure start to crack. I blinked hard, maintaining control, and waited for the noise to fade. The rest of the ceremony passed quickly. Official photos, receiving line, handshakes with people I'd never met who wanted to tell me how inspiring I was. I smiled, thanked them, and moved through the crowd with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to endure attention without enjoying it. Afterward, there was a small reception in an adjacent room. My squadron commanders clustered together, swapping stories I absolutely did not want my parents overhearing. Major Wells cornered me near the refreshment table. "General Horner," she said, grinning. "Has a nice ring to it. Colonel suited me better. Too bad. You're stuck with this now." She lowered her voice. "How does it feel? Ask me in 6 months. Fair." She glanced around the room. "You know half the women in this building are going to be watching every move you make, right? You're their proof that it's possible. That's a lot of pressure. You've been carrying it your whole career. Now it just has a title." She wasn't wrong. The promotion didn't change who I was, but it changed what I represented. Every decision I made would ripple beyond my immediate command. Every success would be analyzed as proof women could lead at this level. Every failure would be weaponized as evidence we couldn't. It was exhausting just thinking about it. My father found me near the end of the reception. He looked tired but content, the way he always did after big events. "Your mother's taking pictures with everyone," he said. "She's going to fill 3 photo albums with this. Let her. She's earned it. So have you." He studied me for a moment. "You doing okay, kid?" "Honestly? I don't know yet." "That's fair. It's a big change." He smiled. "But you've handled every big change they've thrown at you. This won't be different. This feels different. It is different. But you're the same person you were yesterday. Just with more people depending on you." He was right. The core mission hadn't changed. Protect. Lead. Serve. The scope had expanded, but the foundation remained solid. Colonel Hale approached as my father wandered off to find my mother. He handed me a glass of water. "You survived," he said. "Barely. That speech was good. Honest. People respect that." "I hope so. I'm terrible at this political stuff." "No, you're not. You just don't enjoy it. There's a difference." He paused. "You know they're going to test you, right? The old guard. The officers who think stars should stay within traditional pathways. They're going to wait for you to make a mistake, and when you do, they'll pounce. Let them. I've been dealing with that my entire career." "I know. But it's different at this level. The stakes are higher. The visibility is greater. One misstep could derail everything you've built." "Then I won't misstep." He smiled. "There's the Reaper I know." The reception ended at 1300 hours. My parents caught an evening flight back to Nevada, exhausted but happy. Major Tran returned to her regular duties. Colonel Hale headed home with a promise to check in soon. The crowd dispersed, and suddenly I was alone in my new office, staring at the stars on my uniform and wondering what came next. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Congratulations, General. Well deserved. James Thorne." I stared at it for a long moment. Part of me wanted to delete it without responding. Another part recognized the gesture for what it was, an olive branch from someone who'd learned too late what grace looked like. I typed back, "Thank you, Admiral." Nothing more. Nothing less. Another message came through, this one from Commander Lawson. "Saw the news. Proud of you, Isabella." I know I have no right to say that, but it's true. I almost didn't respond. Then I thought about the officer I wanted to be, someone who acknowledged growth in others even when they'd failed me before. "Appreciate it, Rick. Take care of yourself." I set the phone down and looked out the window. The Potomac River stretched below, reflecting the afternoon sun. Traffic moved along the highways. People went about their lives, unaware that someone in this building was making decisions that would affect their safety, their freedom, their future. That someone was now me. My first official meeting as Deputy Director of Operations was scheduled for the following Monday. I'd spend the weekend reviewing briefs, learning systems, and preparing for the operational tempo that came with flag officer responsibility. No more flying regular combat sorties. No more hands-on squadron leadership. This was strategic command. Big picture. Long-term planning. I missed flying already. But I also understood why I was here. The Air Force needed leaders who understood operations from the cockpit level. Who'd felt the G-forces. Who'd made split-second decisions at 40,000 feet. Who knew what it meant to trust your wingman with your life. I was here because I'd lived it. Now I had to use that experience to make the force better for everyone coming behind me. My phone rang. Major Wells. General, do you have a minute? Always. What's up? I just got notified. I'm being considered for Squadron Command, an F-35 unit out of Hill Air Force Base. They want recommendations. I'm listing you as primary. I smiled. You don't need my recommendation. Your record speaks for itself. Still, it would mean a lot. You'll have it by tomorrow morning. And Dana. Ma'am? You're going to be incredible. Trust yourself. I learned from the best. After we hung up, I pulled up the recommendation form and started writing. As I detailed Wells' qualifications, I thought about legacy. About how leadership wasn't measured in promotions or awards, but in the people you developed. The officers you mentored. The standards you set. I'd spent years trying to prove I belonged. Now I was helping others do the same. That shift felt significant. I worked until 1900 hours, then drove to the small apartment I'd rented in Arlington. It was temporary housing, a way station until I figured out where I wanted to put down roots. The apartment was sparse, furniture from IKEA, unpacked boxes in the corner, a single photo of my parents on the kitchen counter. I ordered takeout, changed into civilian clothes, and sat on the couch with my laptop, reviewing operational reports from the Pacific Theater. Tensions were escalating. Chinese military activity had increased near Taiwan. Our allied partners were requesting more presence patrols. Resource allocation was becoming complex. These were the problems that now fell under my purview. Not flying the missions, but ensuring the people who did had everything they needed to succeed. It was fulfilling in a different way. Strategic instead of tactical. But still connected to the mission. Around 2200 hours, my phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize with a DC area code. General Horner, I answered. General, this is Senator Patricia Meadows' office. The Senator chairs the Armed Services Committee and would like to schedule a meeting with you next week to discuss operational readiness in the Pacific. Would you have availability? I grabbed my calendar. I can make time. What day works best for the Senator? We scheduled it for Wednesday at 1400 hours. After hanging up, I sat there processing the new reality. I was now someone senators wanted to meet with. Someone whose opinion carried weight in policy discussions. Someone who'd transitioned from tactical operator to strategic leader. The stars on my uniform weren't just rank. They were responsibility, influence, power. I had to be careful with all three. I spent the rest of the evening preparing for the meeting, researching the Senator's priorities and reviewing classified assessments of Pacific readiness. By midnight, I had a solid brief prepared. By 0100 hours, I was too wired to sleep, so I went for a run. The streets of Arlington were quiet at that hour, just the occasional car passing and the hum of distant traffic. I ran along the river trail, letting my mind process everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. 1 year ago, I'd been a colonel commanding an air wing, focused on operations and mission success. Now I was a general officer with strategic responsibilities that extended far beyond any single command. The scale had shifted. The complexity had increased. But the core remained the same: serve the mission, support the people, make the hard calls. I could do this. I had to do this. Because somewhere out there, A young woman was sitting in a ready room, the only female pilot in her squadron, wondering if she'd ever advance beyond a certain point, wondering if the system would let her. My job was to make sure the answer was yes. Not by lowering standards, not by creating special pathways, but by ensuring competence was the only metric that mattered. By dismantling the barriers that had nothing to do with capability. By leading in a way that made gender irrelevant. That was the real mission. And it was just beginning. I returned to my apartment at 0200 hours, showered, and finally fell asleep. When my alarm went off at 0530, I woke with clarity. The stars on my uniform represented more than rank. They represented possibility. Proof that the system could evolve. That barriers could fall. That a girl from Nevada who grew up watching jets could end up leading the people who flew them. I put on my uniform, pinned on the stars, and looked at myself in the mirror one more time. General Isabella Horner. It still felt strange. But it also felt right. I grabbed my keys and headed to the Pentagon, ready for whatever came next. That's it for me. I held the line and the room got quiet. If this hit home, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs the reminder. Drop your take in the comments, I read them. Questions for you. Have you ever been dismissed in public, then suddenly recognized in private? What did you do next? When someone crosses a line at work, do you call it out or document and escalate later? What's one boundary you're setting this week, and how will you enforce it? Have you ever stood up for a colleague in the moment? How did it land? If you were in that briefing, what would you have said when the screen flashed my call sign? For those in uniform or high-stakes roles, what earns respect fastest? Results, rank, or how you carry yourself? What's your quiet revenge story where professionalism did the talking?